Before the Golden Towers and campaign rallies, before the presidency and the politics, Donald Trump was already a power player in New York City. Flashy, wealthy, and loud, he was the face of '80s ambition. A real estate mogul who inherited millions, surrounded by lawsuits and spotlights. But behind the gold was a different story. Just over a decade earlier, the U.S. government accused the Trump family business of refusing to rent to Black and Latino tenants. Instead of backing down, Trump's attorney, Roy Cohn, the same man who defended mob bosses and mentored McCarthy, countersued the government for $100 million. The case was settled. No admission of guilt. No apology. Was Trump already viewing Black and Latino youth through a distorted lens of fear and superiority? Meanwhile, on a quiet spring evening in April 1989, 28-year-old Tricia Maley went for a jog through Central Park. She never made it home. She was found hours later, beaten, raped, left for dead. The city exploded. Crime was already sky high, and fear was everywhere. Within days, 5 Black and Latino teenagers were arrested. Corey Wise, Yusef Salam, Kevin Richardson, Antron McCray, Raymond Santana. Another teen, Stephen Lopez, was charged too, before taking a plea deal in a separate assault. Their names became headlines, their faces symbols of fear, of rage, of something much deeper under the surface. This is how Donald Trump inserted himself into one of the most racially charged cases in modern history, and how the truth fought its way to the surface. The media didn't just report on the case, it shaped it. The 5 teens weren't referred to by name. They were cast as a feral gang, a wolf pack. Reporters latched onto the word wilding, supposedly slang for rampaging through the city for thrills, a word the teens later said was misunderstood or never even used. And behind the scenes, the media wasn't acting alone. New York Governor Mario Cuomo publicly backed the investigation. Though careful with his words, he supported the prosecutorial process and echoed calls for swift justice, reflecting the overwhelming pressure on authorities to make arrests and restore order. With Cuomo's backing and the city's mood demanding accountability, the tone was set. These weren't just suspects, they were now symbols of fear, of lawlessness, of a city out for blood.
Our children will have a future secure with a nation at peace and protected against aggression. We'll have a prosperity that spreads the blessings of our abundance and opportunity across all America. We'll have safe and active neighborhoods, drug-free schools that send our children soaring in the atmosphere of great ideas and deep values.
But this was bigger than one case. Politicians were pushing tough on crime agendas. Police were under pressure to clean up the streets by any means necessary. With Reagan's war on drugs, carried forward by George H.W. Bush and the growing crack epidemic, the narrative was pre-written. Into that hysteria walked Donald Trump. On May 1st, 1989, Trump paid $85,000 to publish a full-page ad in 4 New York newspapers. He demanded the reinstatement of the death penalty just days after the arrests. No trial, no convictions, just fury. Community leaders were outraged. The ad didn't just fan the flames, it was gasoline. And it wasn't aimed at the crime. It was aimed at them, 5 teenage boys, presumed guilty in the court of public opinion. Donald Trump had no legal stake in the Central Park jogger case. He wasn't a prosecutor, judge, or detective. But his voice, his wealth, his notoriety, gave him influence most couldn't dream of. His full-page ad wasn't just an opinion, it was a demand. A billionaire using his platform to pressure a system already cracked by bias, fear, and political posturing. And it worked. The calls for punishment grew louder. The public's rage deepened. No one wanted facts, they wanted retribution. Meanwhile, inside NYPD precincts, 5 terrified teenagers were being interrogated, alone. Hours of questioning, no legal counsel, promises of going home if they just confessed. And eventually, they did. Legal scholars would later call it one of the most glaring examples of pretrial bias in modern legal history. Advocates saw it as a textbook case of racial injustice, how Black and Latino youth are dehumanized before they even set foot in court. Behind the scenes of the confessions stood Linda Fairstein, then head of the Manhattan Sex Crimes Unit. She oversaw the case from the moment the jogger was found. It was Fairstein who coordinated with detectives, piecing together a narrative that would frame the 5 boys as a single violent force. Under her direction, the interrogations continued for hours, without lawyers, without sleep, without food. Her team ignored inconsistencies, contradictions, and the absence of physical evidence. What mattered were the confessions, forced, edited, shaped to fit the story. But Fairstein would later defend her actions for decades, maintaining the boys were guilty even after DNA cleared them. But history and the facts tell a different story. For years she was praised as a fierce advocate for victims. But in this case, the victims were not just the jogger. They were also 5 boys, sacrificed in the name of fear, politics, and a city's thirst for justice. When a public figure like Trump calls for execution before a trial begins, the scales of justice are already tipped. The system is poisoned from the start. This was a clash of power and powerlessness. On one side, 5 working-class kids from Harlem and the Bronx. On the other, a man with millions, media access, and a gift for inciting emotion through spectacle. Decades later, that same gift for provocation would echo again, this time with deadly consequences. The January 6th Capitol attack again showed the world that Trump's words, when charged with anger, don't just stir opinion. They move people to act. For 13 years, the Central Park Five carried the weight of a crime they didn't commit. Branded as monsters, stripped of their futures. Until in 2002, the truth finally spoke. Matias Reyes, a convicted serial rapist already serving a life sentence, confessed to the attack. His DNA matched. His timeline matched. And unlike the others, his story never changed. The 5 were exonerated. Their names cleared. But their youth, their dignity, their time never returned. In 2014, New York City settled a civil rights lawsuit, awarding $41 million to the men who had once been paraded as predators. And Trump? He didn't flinch. No apology. No admission of error. In fact, he doubled down, insisting in interviews years later that they probably did something. This wasn't new. Trump's form has always been defiance in the face of facts, such as the current refusal to roll back aggressive tariffs against China, even as the global economy buckles. The same refusal to admit fault. The same unwillingness to retreat, no matter the cost. For the convicted 5, in time, their story became one of redemption. Through documentaries and dramatizations like Ava DuVernay's When They See Us, millions saw the humanity that had been ignored in 1989. In the aftermath of the television series, Linda Fairstein, once celebrated, faced fierce backlash. Publishers cut ties, organizations distanced themselves, and under mounting pressure, she was forced to retire from several high-profile boards. However, Donald Trump somehow found fresh appeal among Black America decades later. In the 2024 election, exit polls showed a surprising shift. Over 20% of Black male voters backed Trump, despite Kamala Harris on the Democratic ticket. His alliance with figures like Candace Owens helped somewhat reframe his image, especially among younger voters. Against all odds and all history, Trump reclaimed the presidency. Have some Black Americans forgotten? Or is it that the pain of the past has been buried beneath the promises of power? This story sits in a long American shadow, a history where young Black men have been falsely accused, from George Stinney in 1944, executed at just 14 years old. But for these 5 men, Corey, Yusuf, Antron, Kevin, and Raymond, we thank God they are still here, not as criminals, but as survivors, as reminders. If you found this story powerful, subscribe for more deep dives into our Black legacy files. With that said, thanks for watching another Fresh K documentary. And until next time,